Hey everyone, welcome back to Deeply Rooted by Planting Roots, a Christian podcast for military women and wives. Today we have the pleasure of chatting with Kim Chatto, and she is actually on our staff here at Planting Roots. And so I'll allow her to introduce herself and then we'll dive right in.
Hi, everyone. As Ashleigh kindly introduced me, I'm Kim Chatto. I am the Deputy Director of Marketing for Planting Roots. A little bit about myself. I have the honor and privilege of working with Alyssa. She's our head of marketing. She's so fun to work with. The marketing team is such a blast. And we just have so many cool opportunities to really get the word out there about resources for
Yeah.
military women. And I love it. It's such a fun ministry to be a part of.
Yeah, we definitely have one of the most special teams, I feel like, at Planting Roots. And so it's such a joy to get to work with so many people. And I feel like it connects us. It reminds me of the military because we're kind of all over the place, but we get to come
Yes.
together and just have that community. So thanks for joining us today. Kim is probably one of the coolest people I've ever met. And so when she agreed to come on the podcast, I was like, this is so sweet because Kim has quite a story. She has really a testimony that is unlike any other I've seen, and it's really beautiful. And so, Kim, I would love for you to just give kind of an overview of your life and where you're at now, because you were in the military, you're not now. You have a couple kids. Kim's done pageantry. She's like the jack of all trades. So I would love if you would just give like a blurb of what the last 20 years have looked like.
Yeah, no. So super fun. I've lived quite the life. I feel like I'm always going on adventures and doing things and it's really fun. Like if I'm going to live one life to glorify God, it's going to be quite the story. I think I've lived it for
Amen.
that. So my mom and I are originally from the Philippines, but she ended up marrying a U.S. sailor, my stepdad, Jim, and he came from like a big Wisconsin, big Navy family. So he ended up moving to Wisconsin. And that's where I grew up. But I had like the privilege of having both some deep ties and roots to the Philippines and then growing up in the cheese state. And so it was really fun. I had an amazing childhood. And then so funny enough, coming from a big Navy family, I was very much like this girly girl. My dad kept saying, like, hey, why don't you talk to a military recruiter? Why don't you go do this? And I was like, I can't think of anything I want to do less. Like, why would I want someone to yell at me? That sounds awful. And I was my origin story of how I became an Air Force officer is hilarious. I was in a musical in college, and my friend John was in the Air Force ROTC program, and he's like, "Hey, I think you'd like this. I think you'd really like excel in ROTC." And I was like, "That is so funny, John." Like, I was just like, "I don't think that at all." He's like, "You come from a big military family. I think you would like it." And honestly, I think how I excelled in the military is it gives you so much structure that when you don't want to think about something, it's already laid out for you. Like we
Yeah.
obviously think critically, strategically, and everything, but there's so much of like the daily grind that is already set in place that it honestly just makes life a little bit easier. And that specific lane.
Yeah.
So when you're a college student and you're navigating courses and classes and goals and expectations, you're constantly resetting that for yourself. And it was just a really healthy structure for me. So yeah, I commissioned out of the University of Wisconsin-Madison as an Air Force officer. Also, like as if I needed to make my life any more difficult, when I was a junior in college, I actually like rekindled a relationship with a guy from my hometown who was in the Marine Corps. And like per military stereotypes, we had a whirlwind romance. I think we dated for like 3 months and got engaged and then got married like 2 months later. And I'm like in college at the time. And
Oh
if
my
anybody
gosh.
knows me, I'm super goals driven. Like the world is my oyster kind of personality. And so my parents were like, oh my gosh, she's 21 and she's getting married. Like, what is she doing? Um, yeah, so did that, got married when I was 21, and wholeheartedly believe that coming from a large Navy family, so I was a military brat, I was about to be an Air Force officer, I was like, "I got this is fine." But being a military spouse was such a unique and challenging dynamic and so very
Yeah.
special, but so many different challenges, like, I did my senior year of college, which is huge for a lot of people, and my husband was deployed. And so, like, in between exams and classes and all these things, I'm carrying like, a post office box to our local post office to send them a care package. Like my reality was a
Mm.
lot different than most 21, 22-year-olds at the time. And but yeah, I became an Air Force officer. He came back from his deployment. We were being grown-ups, navigating life and our goals, and did a little over 11 years as an Air Force officer. I started off in nuclear weapons, as a combat crew commander, and then cross-trained. I did cool stuff with that job. That was very, like, it was really awesome. But then I cross-trained into public affairs, and usually, for Air Force at least, you try so many different mission sets. So you don't really stay in one. Like, you might work with fighter aircraft, you might work with special operations, you might work with mobility or education, or, like, you'll go into different areas. No, I ended up, like, specializing in special operations. So most of my career was in special
What?
operations. So yeah, it was, but the good and bad of it was it's an incredible mission. Love the community. It forever, like, impacted how I viewed the world and people and community and just togetherness and how special the military is. But when you get out of that, it is such a hard transition because
Yeah.
everything else is just a little less sparkly, a little less tight knit. And I was like, oh, I don't love this. And that community was really special to me because in that time of being a public affairs officer, I had both my son William and then my daughter Evelyn, but I also ended up getting divorced, in New Mexico. And so having most of my Air Force career at that point being in a married couple and then switching to being a single mother, that was a transition. And I don't regret those aspects of it, but like, I felt at the time like two entirely separate career paths because I was, like, supported or somewhat supported here and then on my own here. And I'm grateful for every opportunity I had, but it was a ride. It was a ride,
Yeah.
and I think from today, so now I'm a civilian, I'm a defense contractor, still work in defense missions, but yeah, still have my 2 kiddos, live in Utah, love it here, and I'm in pageants. So I think that kinda,
Yeah.
like, brings us full circle.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I want to dive into a few aspects of that because I think that your story is so unique in the fact that so many women can connect with you on different parts of it. Maybe not holistically, but there are so many different parts, whether it be getting married young or having children or being divorced and trying to find Jesus in the midst of that,
Mhm.
or getting out of the military. And so I think there's a lot of aspects that I would just love to ask a couple questions in each of them. The first one being, what was it like being married so young? And what do you think that, like, looking back now, 11, 12 years, like, what would you do differently and what would you do the same?
Sure. Okay. There's so many different parts of this, though. So I'm hoping that I do justice to anybody who's listening who's navigating stuff. I don't think that there's anything wrong with getting married at a young age. And I've
Yeah.
seen a lot of successful military couples. However, I will say that um, military life is just a challenging life. And a lot of people take that on, and that's incredible. And it's a sacrifice. But it's hard. And I think there's a lot of aspects too where we weren't really I didn't experience this with when I was married, but there's so much time spent apart.
Mm.
And so there's a lot of navigating, like, what am I like on my own solo and what am I like when my partner transitions back and we're doing life together. Oh yes, but my partner will
Yeah.
leave again and then come back. And so, like, there's a lot of challenges with that. And also you're also growing up. Like, my ex-husband and I, like, we were just so young, and so we were growing up together, so who I was at 21, like, you should expect to change. Like, you should expect to grow and develop and mature and have different perspectives, and I think that when I got married at 21, just for my situation specifically, I am such a romantic. And I was like, "Oh, I'm going to have, like, my perfect Marine husband, and he's going to be all these things for me, and we're gonna be this incredible military power couple." And it looked beautiful on paper, but I know for our situation and our story, like, it was different. The reality was different. Like, he was like, "Yep, I could absolutely be a stay-at-home dad for these situations," but when you're actually living that reality, he's like, "I actually don't like this at all, or this isn't a good fit." And I know his transition out of the Marine Corps when he separated from the military, that was so hard. Mine was hard
Yeah.
too, but I think that the Marine Corps identity was different than
Mm.
my Air Force identity, and I wasn't, I was 23, 24, I can't remember, but I wasn't necessarily equipped to help him with that because I was also like a baby officer doing a nuclear mission, trying to work and balance these things, and me saying things like, "Hey, like if you have a goal, if you want to go back to school, chase a career dream, do all this stuff," and me thinking I'm being supportive that way. If I was married to myself, that would be supportive, but for him specifically, I think he was struggling through some of that. So there's just things and aspects of it where, like, you're young, you're gonna grow, you're gonna change. And I think, like, our personalities today and how we co-parent, I definitely think that we're, like, friendly and we could have been friends at certain points, but we just got married so young under really specific circumstances. And I also would say, in the kindest way, I do, have a lot of respect for my ex-husband, but we just weren't equally yoked. We had different goals. We had, like, underlying the same values, but we had very different goals, different ways that we approached ambition and how we wanted to achieve things in life. And so it just kinda created the perfect storm where, I think some people are able to navigate that really well to get to a common ground, and we were not. And so there
Yeah.
was we were married for quite some time. We're married for almost 9 years, and a lot of that was navigating how we were very, very different people. And I think you can also see, like, he lives in rural New Mexico and I live in Utah. Like, even how we've approached where we live and our careers and everything, it's just different. Nothing wrong with it,
Yeah.
but it didn't work.
Yeah. What made you want to have kids and be a mom? Because I feel like that's something you're so passionate about and something that you just like exude. You give the mom energy, Kim. And I want to know, like, what is your best piece of advice maybe for someone who is a military spouse or is on the other side of things and is in the military themselves and having kids? What would you say to that person that needs to hear something because you've lived it?
Yeah, I have wanted to be a mom for the longest time. I'm like the eldest. I'm the classic eldest Asian daughter in my family, so I was always, the one, like, supervising siblings and cousins and everything. And so I always just picture myself being a mom. Like, I honestly think that I would have had kids even sooner if I didn't have. You can hear my kids in the background, mom in it. I was just like, she's informing me every detail. She's like, "I need a cup of water, mom." Um, but I also think that, like, I would have had kids sooner if it wasn't for that particular military career I started with, because you do. I think a lot of people in the military, if they do desire to have children and they're able to, they're factoring in, like, "Hey, what does my career look like right now? And,
Hmm.
like, do I have the bandwidth to be supportive?" And I think at least from what I've observed is that whether you're the active duty or military personnel or your spouse or joint spouse or anything, like, you wanna be there for your partner. So you don't wanna be in a career field where you're like, "Hey, have all our children, but I'm sorry, you're never gonna see me. You're never gonna feel supported. You're gonna have to do this on your own." So I think if I had been in a different career field, I think we would have had kids sooner, but God's plan's always greater. But so that was, like, one of those things too, but I love it. I love being a mom. I love giving, and actually before I even had kids, when I was stationed in Montana, I was a court appointed special advocate, so I advocated for kids in the foster care system, and I totally thought that I would have been a foster parent before I even had kids. So just having an impact on kids and them being in my life has always been, like, really important to me.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's just fun, and I also think it's kinda cool to have, as a Christian, to have the privilege of God choosing you to help raise someone. And, like, whoever's listening, my Christian perspective on it is my children are not my own. My children are God's, and I'm
Yeah.
here to help cultivate and mold them as much as possible, and they will make a difference on this earth and glorifying their testimonies to honor Him. But yeah, but while I do have them and as I mold and shape them, like it's a huge responsibility and it's an honor and privilege. So yeah, I love being a mom.
Yeah, I love that you say that. It is such an honor and such a privilege. I think even I work with children all across the world, and that's part of my position. And I think just getting to see how children are the Lord's, like they are so through and through, and they have that childlike faith, that innocence to just love God and revere God. And they may not understand everything, but that's what makes it so beautiful is they don't need to. They just want to honor the Lord when you are upbringing them in that way. And so
Yeah.
I just think that that is so encouraging to the mom maybe listening. I think a beautiful part of your story also is kind of your transition out of the military and what that looked like. How did you decide that God was calling you out and how did you navigate that season?
That is such a great question. If you're listening, you're probably familiar with the military, but we have a transition assistance program or TAP, and that's a DoD mandated course that you have to take at any point in your career. It just has to be on your files that you did it. I took that 4 times in 4 different duty locations. Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
What?
Yeah, so I'm every time I had a baby, um, and talk about, like, the struggle of being a mom in the military and we have phenomenal, the military is phenomenal maternity leave and oftentimes, depending on your unit, like, just really phenomenal support systems.
Yeah.
Um but every baby, I was like, how am I at the end of this supposed to give my baby to the child development center and go back to work and pretend like everything's fine? Like this wasn't the worst thing ever to do. And I think I've seen it with every single active duty mom. You have a
Mm,
moment where you're like, am I making the right choice? And some people, they're just like, actually, I need to separate from the military now. Like this is the best thing for my family. And I totally understood that. There was But yeah, there was points, many points where I was like, is this like the best fit for me and my family? Um, and I promise this is like on point, but it's one of those meaningful stories where like, it's hard. This decision doesn't necessarily come easy. I think when you hit like a retirement, you're like, ah, it's time to go. But it is a huge transition. And I remember I had my daughter Evelyn, and this was before I had gotten divorced. I had phenomenal military leadership and he's now a general. But one of my favorite officers, he knew that I was like really wrestling with this. And at the time, though, just for perspective on the podcast, my relationship was not well, and I was struggling with that too. And he had like pulled me aside and he's like, "Can we talk about this?" And this is someone as the vice commander for an Air Force wing. He sees it all. Like if you're
mm,
the deputy director, vice, any of those are usually like the disciplinarians of like any squadron, unit, wing, whatever your sizable military formation is. So they see the stuff. And he's just like, "Hey, can we talk about this?" And in a very special operations, like, let me break it down for you way, he kind of was just like, my concern is, he's like, I will support whatever you want to do. He's like, I think you are such a sharp officer. You're going to do great things. He's like, I would hate to lose you, but can I like be straight with you here. And he's like, his concern was in viewing and observing aspects of my relationship. He's like, I'm just worried that you are trying to go like 90% and your partner is maybe not even hitting 10 really. Like you are trying to cover for all these things. And he's like, I just worry that you would make certain sacrifices and impact your career. And he's like, and again, I would respect anything that you chose, but it would impact your career for someone who is not like meeting you halfway in a partnership. And he
mm,
starts listing like all these different things that he's witnessed. And this man has had so much experience navigating so many different aspects of base life and cases and working with OSI and all this stuff. And he's just like, just from my experience, that's what I'm seeing here. And he's like, I would just hate for you to make sacrifices for someone who is going to continually keep taking when you keep giving. And that just like left a mark on me forever. I was like, oh my
yeah,
gosh. But he's like, but I will also say to have that kind of feedback, I also was given the support. He was just like, I know that you're not going to use and abuse the system. I know that like it's challenging to go navigate pickups of kids and this and this and this. And so I think both of those, sorry, this is like merging both of our questions from before,
yeah.
but I think it's like when you do have help and support, it looks different. And when you don't, it makes things harder, but it also kind of forces your hand in terms of like, what am I able to do now? And when I did decide to separate from the Air Force, um, It was both a combination of, like, circumstances with my career, and then also just me being like, I think God doesn't want me to do this anymore or this specific thing. And I had kind of said before with the special operations community, it was so special and so tight knit.
Yeah.
And I remember being on mountains in South Korea with Green Beret teams, and these guys, wonderful, fantastic people. But my kids I was unaccompanied in Korea. My kids were not there, and these gentlemen knew my kids' names. They would ask me how I was doing, if that was the last time I talked to them every time. And then when I went, when I transitioned back to the US and was with a completely different non-special operations unit, and I don't mean to be critical of them, but I couldn't confidently say that they like knew my kids' names or anything, or like what I was really going through. And so that's transitioned to I just felt like God was like, there's something else I need you to do. I need you to serve in a different way.
Yeah.
And regardless of, like, being like, I think I'm following what God wants in the plan here, it was so hard. Like, I separated about a year and a half ago, and last year was one of the most challenging years of my life. So even if God calls you to something like a military separation, that doesn't mean that it's going to be like, wow, this is so easy and seamless and
Yeah.
everything. I just was like, to the point where I'm like, did I misunderstand? Because this is very difficult. Like, this
Mm.
almost feels like I have failed to, like, follow and obey an
Yeah.
instruction. And I don't think I did. I think it was just that hard.
Wow. And I think that you've opened the subject of like not everything that God calls you to is easy. And I think we're living in this society where we almost want to be so prosperity gospel minded where it's like, oh, because God said this is what I should do or he's called me in this doesn't mean that it's easy. I mean, you know this, but recently I left my old job. I was working in a nonprofit that I knew God wasn't didn't have for me anymore. And it was not optimal timing.
Yeah.
And it was like, I don't think I'm going to be able to do this, God. Like, my husband just got back from a deployment. This doesn't make any sense. Why would I quit my job? Like,
Yeah.
and little did I know 3.5 months later, I would be having my dream job. But to say that that was easy to leave was that would be so false. I mean, it was the most difficult thing ever. The conversations that I thought would be like, "I love you guys, I'm leaving," were like, "You're worthless, hand us your things now." Like, it
Yeah.
was and I think that that sometimes can scare us into like, "Oh, because this is hard,
Mhm.
doesn't mean it's God's direction." And that is not correct. Like, we see David go through so many hardships. I mean, look at the Psalms and how he lamented. Like, there's such an aspect to that can't be tainted. David
Yeah.
lamented because life is hard. And
Yes.
that doesn't mean that that isn't what God has called you to, though.
Oh,
I think
absolutely.
that there's so much pruning that happens in those seasons. And just getting to even know you, Kim, for the last year and see how God has used you. Pageantry has been one of the most recent ones. And I would just love for you to talk about how this came about and how God even threw you into the mix of this because you are now Miss Philippines in the United
Yes.
States representing. And I don't even know what to say. I just want to hear how you got into it and where this came from.
Yeah, um, so in the Philippines, pageantry is a huge deal, and like I said, I originally come from there, but with my military career, all these different life experiences, I never actually competed in a pageant growing up, and was super familiar with like Miss USA, Worlds, Miss America, all those things. Like I've had friends who've competed in that system, so I was very familiar with like cheering on like loudly for my girlfriends who are doing this, but it just
Yeah.
didn't seem like that was going to be something that I ever did. And then, for background, I live in Utah. I know I've said it before, but it is a largely Church of Latter-day Saints community throughout the entire state and even
Yeah.
up in Idaho too. And so when I got here, I had moved from Florida, which is very like you can find a Christian church of any denomination on every street corner, to you're living in wards in Utah, and I've met incredible and fantastic people here, but I'm not that faith set. And so I was like, all right. So when I did meet my church community, they were fantastic. I'm part of a military wives and military women Bible study here. and you have just this diverse group of women, different backgrounds, different ages, different circumstances, and they just became some of my closest girlfriends. And two of the women, Kaylin and Abby, they were already competing in the Mrs. portion of Mrs. for Utah for America pageant system. And one day, Kaylin was like, I really think that you should consider competing. And again, I'm like in my 30s, I'm like, girl, why? I was but most of, like, the pageantry system that I had seen were very young women who are and, like, the Miss America system, for example, is a scholarship pageant system. So, when you're competing, the intent is that you're going to win scholarships so that you can go to college. Like, so these are very young women. And I was like, I don't know." And she just kept being like, "I think you would do awesome at it. I think, like, you could even win." And I think I hit a point where I was like, "Why not? Why not do this?" I think I wanted to own my identity outside of the Air Force and
Yeah.
to also build community here too, because all of my friends and my life are so military centric that I'm like, what happens when they PCS? What happens if they separate? Like, they might not stay in Utah. So, do you have community outside of the military? And that's like a big plug if you're in the military or affiliated with it. You gotta go out and build your community. No matter like, go meet people on base, go meet people out in the local community that you're in. It's like you have to build that
Yeah.
community. So,
Yes.
so I made just incredible friends through that pageant experience. It was so informative, so building. Did just some incredible things for resiliency of my mental health and fighting
Mm.
comparison and also just my faith. Like, I am so firmly grounded in this idea that if it is not part of God's plan, or if it doesn't work out, it wasn't part of God's plan. And to be like, God has something different in store. Better is subjective. I might think it's better, or but honestly, in everything that I do, I'm at a point in my life where my actions and the pathway that I do will glorify God. Even if I don't exactly love the journey that I'm on, I just firmly believe that my actions and steps and things are built to glorify God. That's my purpose on earth.
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah, so that was, like, the big aspect of pageantry, but then I ended up my first pageant, which was, like, February, March of this year, got first runner up, so came in second place and met the coolest women and also just a cool faith dynamic too. Like I said, I'm not LDS. I probably am most closely to being, like, Baptist. Military life, if you know, like, you're either Protestant or Catholic, and Protestant has every Christian denomination, so, like, there you go. Um, but I got to become friends with and work with women who are LDS and compete with women alongside women who are LDS. And when I say we just had these incredibly moving moments of prayer together, we would pray for each other. Again, different. I know we believe in Christ, but different faith denominations. We would pray for each other. We would pray before we would go out. We were cheering loudly for each other. The beautiful thing about pageantry, too, when you have a really solid pageant system, and I've also heard Utah is really special with this too, so keep that in mind. But we all have our insecurities. And
Mm.
when you walk in these room and you see the most stunning women who are successful in all these different ways and stuff, and you become friends with them and you recognize that every single one of these women has an insecurity, like, it really creates some cool perspective in terms of,
Yeah.
like, "Holy cow, I think so highly of you. Why can't you see this thing?" But the reality is, like, we can't help it. That's life. That's living in a world fallen in sin, all of these things, like, it just happens that way. But pageantry is awesome in that this group of women will not let you stay there in that mentality.
Mm.
They will
Yeah.
help lift you up until you can see it for yourself or you're out of that rut. And it's just incredible. Just like the most genuine women. And I get it. Like, when sometimes when you see pageantry, you're just like, really? The most genuine women? Like, yeah, no, it is, which is so cool to have that kind of circle.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and yeah, and so to be able to test my faith, really be firmly rooted in my faith, and then also fight things of comparison and stuff. It was just a beautiful, like, spiritual opportunity and journey.
Yeah, I think that there's so much growth in the way that you talk about your time doing pageantry and even for what's next for you as representing the Philippines. I think that there's something so beautiful about what you said about the comparison and the insecurities. I think especially was something I want to hit on in this episode with this podcast for military women and wives. Most of us are in a comparison game, whether it's with other spouses or other military women in uniform. There is comparison, and I think that's something that eats a lot of us alive, and it can feel so overwhelming and undermining in a lot of ways. What would be some advice that you would say to someone who's really struggling with comparison? Because I feel like in pageantry, you're on a stage, you're being looked at.
Oh, yeah.
You know comparison in such a different light. And so
Yeah.
I think that you have so much wisdom to shed in this arena.
Yeah, so pageantry is wild. So like I was saying, we have insecurities. You're literally consenting to being judged on everything that you are most critical of yourself about. It is when I tell you it is the most like aggressive mental exercise of like, hey, what do I believe in myself? What is my identity in? It's huge. I mean, the last one I was in, there's a swimsuit portion. Girl, when I
Mm.
tell you, I was like, I think I'm gonna black out. Like, I don't know how I'm gonna like get through this. I firmly was like, I don't know what's about to happen, but it's gonna happen. My roommate Portia, she's also my makeup artist for this next pageant I'm in. But my roommate Portia is the most beautiful soul, and she's just like, I'm going to reframe this, and I'm going to approach swimsuit as my most favorite aspect of this pageant. And it is an opportunity for me to go out there boldly and confidently. And for me, with every insecurity I have, I also just wanted to show up there because I feel like society says so much about like, unless you look a certain way, it is as if like you do not deserve to have a seat at the table. Like you don't deserve
Mm.
to put on a swimsuit and be at the beach with your kids. And I just kept thinking like what a miserable well, when I don't do that. I put on my swimsuit regardless of how I feel about my body. Um, but I'm like, what a miserable way to approach life is that our
Yeah.
worth can only be in how others perceive us when
Mm.
we serve a God who has sacrificed so much and you are so loved. And I'm like, and I've seen so many different like clips and things along these lines of like at the end of your life, no one's gonna be like, she had a killer six pack and she had just like the best legs. Like, it's going to be she made me feel loved and seen. And
Mm.
she always had my kids over and my kids always felt safe at her home. Or it's the impact and like the impression you left with people, not that like, man, she had a flawless nose and because she had it done.
Literally.
Utah has the highest per capita of plastic surgeons in the country. And so that you're also in a pageantry world of incredible women who are and this is not a judgment if you do or don't have plastic surgery, but you're in this grouping of women who do incredible things to pour into people so that like you can fight like this constant need of like, well, I could have something lifted, tucked, taken away, all of these things removed, whatever. You're actively fighting that here too. And so there's a lot where it's just like if you're in this age of comparison, I encourage you to boldly go forth and understand like what your identity is and what you believe in. It does help, whether healthy or not, to recognize like everybody has an insecurity. They have something that they're working through. And I just applaud people who are brave. Like
Mm.
I'm not I don't know, the circle of women that I keep right now in my life and at my age, we're not out here talking about like, if you just had one less love handle, you would just be so much hotter or any of those things. Like the circle of women I keep are like, how can we help watch your kids so you can try out for that opportunity? Do you need to borrow a dress so that you can save some money but feel your best? Like the circle of women I keep just like, we're not talking about those things. And also like if maybe harsh or not, but if that is your circle and they're being highly critical of you and they're not supporting you and it's not healthy, like find a different circle, find a table that
Mm.
you should be at. Because everybody's going through stuff. And I
Yeah.
think that the way that people approach that with love and graciousness makes all the difference. So go do that.
Mm.
Do that instead.
Yeah, I think that there's such a essence right now in today's day and age of judgment, and especially in the military community, I think we as wives of it have seen, and as on this side of it have seen
Yeah.
the lack of grace that
Hmm.
comes sometimes. And I think it's so sad to see obviously I do social media and I get floods of DMs from girls who have been wronged and said like, yeah, they judge me on this or, like I feel so left out. I can't find friends. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know when it flipped of where we are each other's enemies, but that is not what we are called to. We are number one called to serve God faithfully and number two called to love our neighbor as ourself. And I think what you're describing is such an essence of that in this pageantry world. And so I think I just echoing what you said, Kim, if right now you listening, you're in a spot where you aren't surrounded by people that are lifting you up to pursue what God has for you in this season, it's time to find the friends that God does have for you. Because
Yeah.
look at the circle Jesus hung around. Those 12 people, they were ordinary, but
Mhm.
bound to do extraordinary things through the Spirit living inside of them. Ephesians 3:6 talks about like the power of the Spirit working in us and that it may strengthen us. And I think that in this season, we all need strength from the Holy Spirit and we all need that spirit living inside of us to come out and, be the friend that you want to be. And you're not going to be perfect. You should
Yeah.
absolutely have grace for people, but be truthful, be honest, be loving. And at the end of the day, we're all here to do one thing, and that's to fulfill the Great Commission, Matthew 28, and to make Jesus known to the ends of the earth. And you get a front seat show in that for your friends, and they get a front seat show doing that for you, Kim. And so I'm just so encouraged by you, by your story. I love you dearly. I've gotten to know you so dearly, and I can't imagine now not rooting you on. I feel like I'm always in your comment section, and if you don't know who Kim is, you need to go check out her comment section because she genuinely does have some of the sweetest friends. I think that we're all looking for some type of community, and that's the beautiful thing about Planting Roots and about our podcast is that it encourages people like us in our position. And so we hope that you listening feel that. And Kim, thank you for coming and sharing your story today. Thank you for sharing just what God has done in you and through you. It's been so encouraging, and I know that our listeners are going to feel the same way. So thank you, everyone, for listening, and thank you, Kim, for coming on.
Thank you so much, Ashleigh. You are such a gem. I have absolutely loved our time together.
Well, we will see you guys next time for the Planting Roots podcast episode. And in the meantime, stay joyful.